which is likely to decide the future of media? Is it the content, or is it the means with which to carry the content? Let's go to Ms. Cheers.
Good evening. Yeah, I think actually we're going to see that it's a combination of both. So if content is good, you're going to see it anywhere. But the way in which you consume that content is ever evolving and changing. So whereas before we might have to wait obviously for a news report in the evening or in the morning news or even a newspaper, now we're able to get content really, really quickly and accurately, I might add, using social media platforms.
Will we, be able to have both accurate and very speedy information? Will we have sometimes to sacrifice one in order to get the other? What are some of the latest observations? Professor Cheers.
I think it's really important when you have something like breaking news, such as your previous segment that looked at the attack in Bangladesh and an attack in Baghdad over the weekend. I think when you have sort of that immediate breaking news, you are going to have some variances in accuracy. And that's the case whether it be on social media or even if we went back before social media, you still had to make sure reporters and news gatherers that you were able to verify your sources. I think now we have the opportunity of what I like to call citizen journalism. So it's not just about do you as a network or an agency have someone on the ground in said area, but then you're able to really utilize things like Twitter and even Facebook, everything from people checking in, letting you know that they're safe, or even oftentimes offering real live immediate images, voices, sounds of said event that just occurred.
Professor Teng, what do you make of it? Content vis-a-vis the means to consume the content, which is likely to drive us in the future?
Well, once again, I think that the content is important. Content, to me, is always king. But then with the new devices, with the new social media and other new medias, I think it really gives what we call a new assistant, a new arm in helping the old traditional media in professing, in communicating the content. But then content needs to be constantly, in a sense, reinvented, innovated, and updated so that they can meet the demands of the new consumers, because we are living in a new consumer society, and especially young consumers.
We are having much more diversified sources at this moment for different kinds of news, comments as well. But at the same time, we are having an explosion of information and opinions. And therefore, people are asking the question, do we really need to have all of these? Of course, it's a reality. We have to face this reality. But the question is, do we need to have all of this? Do we need to read all of this? Do we as individuals, when we consume the content, have to identify the so-called false from the reality, the wrong from the correct? Will individual citizens have this capability? At this moment, it seems that citizens have to armor themselves with all of these capabilities in order to be a responsible consumer of news. Professor Cheers.
I think it's really important. Obviously, sources and credibility are also paramount. So you want to make sure that if you are reposting, reading, retweeting, or even just consuming, of course, for your own personal knowledge, that things are coming from a reliable, credible source. And that's with everything, whether it be commentary. Anyone, of course, we know can put up a blog and put information out, whether it be false or true. So I think it's really important that you have to make sure that in terms of news and facts and what you're finding out, whether it be, the number of casualties in a terrorist bombing or even your local weather report, you want to make sure that it's coming from a credible place.
Yeah, that is the accuracy of it. But what about the enormous amount of information, whether you need it or not, and the distractions, quote unquote, that sometimes you have to have when you are using certain means of consuming the information. Do we have solutions about this at this moment?
Wow, that's a difficult question.
It is a difficult question.
Time where we do have a lot of information in front of us, and how you sift through that. I like to do with my students here at George Washington University in DC. I'm really big on media literacy. So yes, you're being bombarded with images, with sounds, with video, and how do you discern if that information is accurate? And we do a number of things. I give weekly news quizzes where I'll purposely throw in a sort of false question to make sure that they're really paying attention. And I challenge my students. I'm constantly challenging them to read a variety of different sources. So even if it's one major event that's happened in the world, I ask them, pull information from CCTV, pull it from Al Jazeera, pull something from BBC
Right.
and even the Washington Post. Because I want them to have a well-rounded view of the news and the things that are happening in our world.
That is true also when you are consuming traditional media, right? You got different sources coming from different parts of the world, and it means now we have certainly make it more convenient for us to do so. But do you have problems dealing with the enormous amount of information that is coming your way all the time these days? What is the way? How can one be a smart consumer? It seems that we got the technologies already ready, but not yet the mind.
Well, that kind of an image of the smart consumer or the smart news reader could be a myth, because nobody can be that smart. And so in that sense, I'm not smart myself. And so what do I do? I go to CCTV, for example. I go to, for example, BBC or perhaps other news outlets. Sina.sohu.com in this very country, and so I would compare, and so this readership habit changes because of the new media emergence, and that's something that I love it, because back in the past we have only one source, and that one source.
Come on, you also have several sources. You also could buy newspapers from all over the world if you really want to go out for several hours, going to the bookshops and
there could be one voice,
Yeah.
but now we have multiple voices. And like what Professor Cheer said, we have citizen journalists out there waiting and reporting, and that's also empowerment to me.
That's right. But on the other hand, Professor Chair said, what is the definition now of journalism? As we know, when citizens, common citizens, quote unquote, become reporters, what is the definition of journalism these days? What kind of credibilities would one individual has to carry in order to be so-called a citizen journalist? But does it really matter to that individual who wants just to spread the information?
Sure. I think the biggest thing right now for individuals, because as you mentioned, anyone we know with a smartphone, which is most of us, we can go out and we can report a variety of different things. So I always tell my students, truthfulness, honesty, integrity, those are always going to be the things that are going to be held paramount. If anyone, if 5 people are standing around and they see a car accident, all 5 of those people are going to have different varying ideas of what actually happened, who was at fault, depending on the angle in which you were standing and when you were looking. So I constantly tell my students it comes to that. If you were out somewhere and you see something and you have your phone and you want to take a picture of that, make sure that you're accurate with that. Make sure that you try to get as much information as you can about whatever situation that you're reporting on.
But your students, I have to say, Professor Cheers, I have to say, students of yours are lucky ones because they are joining one of those established universities and being tutored by a teacher like you. But when it comes to 6 billion people around the world who many have a smartphone, it is not important. It is not possible for them to get access to all of these instructing information. And therefore, the question is, when you have citizen journalism, will that be able to make it a more trait of integrity, or it's likely to make it a very mixed picture? As a result, will journalism be transformed, and will journalism still be respected at all, even when it comes to serious journalism, the real professional serious journalism?
Well, that's a really great question, and I think yes, I want to say I want to believe that as this world is constantly evolving and changing, and as more citizens are able to participate in the gathering of information and facts, that journalists are still going to be held credible. I think it comes with the matter of being, citizen journalists. I look at them sort of as our amateurs, and then of course I have our professional journalists who they make sure that they do their job. They're held to a higher standard, and they're supposed to be accurate. And even if you're gathering facts, from citizens. I think we saw a great example of that internationally during the Arab Spring. And we also saw that even, domestically here in the United States with situations such as, police brutality in Ferguson, Missouri. You had people on the ground who were able to assist journalists in gathering that information. So as we're changing, I think that professional journalists have to just make sure that they are doing their due diligence to ensure that the information they're receiving from the public is credible and accurate, especially if they can't be there. But as citizen journalists, I always encourage them to, at the end of the day, if you're out there reporting on something and you see something, try to do it with the utmost integrity.
Right. Professor Tang, we all understand that everybody wants to respect integrity, but under certain circumstances, people make compromises, even professional journalists. Many of the professional journalists have been leaving their traditional media organization to be individuals journalists, to establish their own app and to write stories on their own. There is, of course, the operational cost they have to bear in mind. They have to make a living out of their trade. Earlier, they don't have to worry too much about the cost because they're with a huge organization, but now they're on their own. So will they still abide by the same level of integrity is a big question mark. And also, that leads us to the question of whether there will be more sensationalized stories because that attract eyeball, and we are in an eyeball economy. So all of these is not necessarily just about new or old, but rather a transformation of technology. And what would these technologies mean eventually for the content that we really care about? Professor Tang, I know it's a big question, but I think it's very important that I need to ask you here.
Well, indeed, and ideally, I hope that the professional journalism should go on and, in a sense, to continue in this world of explosion of information.
Well, should is not necessarily related to will be. So what do you make of this current reality, and what is likely to be the trend? How can we make sure it is going in what we still believe as the right direction, Professor?
Well, like I said, ideally, I still hold this professional journalism so very high and high up to this very standards, and both in terms of the community values and also journalistic values. And so in this sense, I think technology played a crucial role in helping professionalism to develop towards that very goal back in the past that we need so many time, so many efforts in terms of verifying that very accuracy of the news. Now, I think with the technology, we have multiple sources. We have a professional journalism out there. We have also multiple others out there on the set, and so that they can send in and streaming in facts and also visual images. Look at the smartphone right now. We have this very smart feature.
It is very convenient. We all understand this. But Professor Cheers, what do you think? Will technology be able to bend our sense of integrity when that is becoming the mainstream, for example? What can we do? Sensationalized news certainly has already made its impact in Brexit, for example, or in the presidential campaign elections. So is it a reality that we need to embrace, or there's some struggles we still need to have?
Yeah. I think it's a reality we need to embrace, and we need to then adjust to some of the struggles that it's going to bring about. So I'm going to go with it's a combination, because we're at a point now where even in the United States, sensationalized journalism, which is a loose term for them, but TMZ, which is more tabloid news, but they're looked at now as fairly credible, especially when it comes to reporting celebrity deaths, for example. They seem to be literally on the forefront, and people are taking them. Before they were just literally, paparazzi out there, snapping pictures of people. But now they're seen as something credible. And I think a lot of that came through a rise in social media and the way in which people are consuming news at an incredibly fast pace.
I see.
You get updates and push notifications. So I think it's coming. And I'm excited on where we're going to be 2, 3, 5 years from now.
Okay, finally, before we go, one sentence from both of you. What we are going to see, the so-called new media, the so-called old media, what is likely to be the prospect with the technology development in 1 or 2 years from now? Professor, cheers, briefly.
Briefly, yes. I think that we're going to see a continuing merge between traditional and new media. And I think that we're going to find out that traditional media companies are going to find ways in which the pay model hasn't picked up very well, but they're going to find ways in which to maintain and fit their content to these younger viewers.
Professor Teng, one sentence.
Well, media convergence and do not sensationalize, sanitize news.